Success spoken here. Start with an inspirational leader. Add truth, quality of life, excellent patient care, and impeccable standards, as all are central to her vision. Meet Cynthia Emiry Roy. She is President and CEO of Connecticut Regional Hospice. Cynthia has 20 years' experience in hospice and palliative care and brings a fresh perspective to an important topic. She serves patients of all ages who have been diagnosed with a life-limiting illness. Cynthia grew the organization from a small business to an industry leader. In this episode of Pause for Purpose, we learn more about her purposeful ascent.
We have a very important and special group leader today, Cynthia Roy. Cynthia is the CEO and president of the Regional Hospice in Danbury, Connecticut. She has served in that capacity since 2007, over 12 years. She's grown the organization from a small business to an industry leader. She previously worked with the New York City chapter of Alzheimer's Association, the Boone County Fund, the fundraising arm of the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. She completed her clinical training at St. Vincent Psychiatric Hospital. While at Columbia University, she also worked with the United Nations non-government organization International Committee on Aging. In 2010, Cynthia assisted with reinventing the state of Connecticut regulations for hospice inpatient care and built the first only 15,036,000 square foot private suite residential hospice in Connecticut. Several of us were fortunate to have toured this amazing place that she had a dream. And if you have to be in hospice, I don't know how you get on the list to get in, but that is a place you would want to be. So I'm going to start today. I'm going to be Barbara Walters, and I'm going to ask Cynthia questions. So my first question to Cynthia is, when you were growing up, what did you dream of becoming? What did you want to be?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I know Vicki and Joyce for a long, long time. Gosh, it's got to be over 6 years. So I'm really glad to see that you guys formed this program because I think it's really interesting. And I think it serves a really important purpose that we need to be talking about. So I'm glad it's become a success. When I was a kid, and some of you know my dad, so you know a little bit about my history. I grew up with a father who ran an airline. So when you have a father that's like that, that has huge expectations for you, basically there was really not a lot of room for having your own dreams. It was really about, go get your MBA, run a business, do all of that. So I really always thought that I was going to run a business, but I didn't know I was going to be in healthcare. And we'll get to the story, but I essentially ended up in hospice care in 1999 when I went to work for a hospice in Wilton in Connecticut, which is a small town here in Connecticut. And then later on my path, continued to bring me where I am today. But I have to say that I never thought when I was a child that I would do what I do now. I tell my kids, always be open about what the possibilities are and how your career can change over time, because honestly, I didn't think I'd be doing this kind of work. And there's fateful stories as to how I ended up where I was really open to the concept that I was going to move my career to the helping profession. And, but now today is super happy with the decision I made and feels like it was the right one. But it was a tough road in the beginning, saying that I was going to do what I was going to do and why I was going to change my career.
So you also wanted to be in forensic social work, which was your initial passion.
Yeah.
And you have sort of a funny story with that.
I do have a funny story. So everybody on this call probably remembers the movie Silence of the Lambs, right? Have you all seen it?
Yeah.
So when I was in undergraduate at Boston University, I was in a social work program, and I was applying to the master's degree programs for social work. And one of the programs I was really interested in was Boston College had a forensic social work program, which means that you assess criminals who are in the criminal justice system and then determine what their level of capability is in terms of standing trial. And the program I applied for, I was the only woman. I got accepted to the program in, gosh, it was 1994. But it was 1992, and Silence of the Lambs came out around then. And people said to me, you don't want to be the only woman in that program, and you don't want to be Clarice. And that's essentially what she did, right? She evaluated criminals. And so I was like, yeah, I don't think that I want to do that. And so I decided not to do that program. And it was a blessing because I got into Columbia University and I went to their social work program, which I think was a much better program for me. And it was a lot more broad and holistic in terms of the training that I had.
So you had some life-defining experiences that made you aware of the special needs of dying children. Can you explain and elaborate on those experiences?
Sure. So when I was in high school, I lost my best friend to a very rare form of leukemia. And it was a really tragic but beautiful passing. It was very unusual. So we read the book Life After Death. We talked about what she wanted for her funeral. We discussed how she wanted to be remembered. We picked out the clothes that she was going to wear at her funeral. We really talked about her life and death. And it was a very unusual experience to have. And I think it forever changed me, honestly. I didn't ever think at the time that I was still going to go into this work. But now as I look back, I truly kind of went around my circle and came back to the work that I did with her in terms of finding this passion. When I had my other jobs, as Vicki mentioned, one of my most significant jobs was when I left the Alzheimer's Association in Manhattan to live in Connecticut again. And I took a position with a hospice in Wilton. At the time, it was called Mid-Fairfield Hospice. It's now something else. But that very first day, I sat at the table with the other team members to hear about patients. And in my new role, I was running a volunteer program for them. And a woman across the table looked at me and she said to me, "Why do I know you?" She said, "You look very familiar." She said, "I know you because I took care of your best friend. I was her hospice nurse when she died." And it had been maybe 12 years later, but I knew at that very moment, and it had to have been 1999. So Leslie was gone a little bit longer than that. She'd been gone almost 15 years. At that very moment in my career, I knew I get goosebumps when I tell that story, because I knew I was in exactly the right place and I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. I was finding my purpose, my passion. And from then on, I never, ever questioned what I was doing. I always knew that this is what I was supposed to do. And I kept in touch with her after I continued to work at that hospice for 9 years before I came to this hospice. I've been here, a long time, since '07.
So in what you do, and obviously with the strong background from your father, you're a risk taker and an entrepreneur. How necessary is it to be a risk taker in your position?
It's pretty pivotal, because when I wanted to build this building, nobody else had built a building like this in Connecticut. And I knew I was going to have to change the regulations in Connecticut to do that. I also knew it was going to involve raising a lot of money. And I have, Doug is on the call, which is great, but I happen to have a really pretty spectacular board of directors who have a nice mix of being open to risk taking. And I think for me, as from a leadership perspective, I had to have a support system in place that was going to be willing to take that risk and also risk a failure if that was going to happen. And we did a lot of research. I did a lot of market analysis about end-of-life care, and I'd already been doing this work for a long time before I built my building. So I knew what was needed. So I knew the need was there, but I just needed to match it up with the research. So I knew the need existed. I think I underestimated the need. We could do 2 other buildings at the rate we're going, because we're full all the time. And we will do that, I think, in time. But essentially, the risk was important in being willing to take that risk and being willing to, do the research required to make a calculated risk that was a good one for us.
How did you find your risk-taking supportive board members?
Oh, Mary just joined. Mary's my chair of my board. We look really hard for really good board members. So I look for board members who represent our community, who are well known in our community, or who are willing to give the time and effort and have different kinds of experience. So Doug is from the finance background. friend Mary's an attorney. So it's really important to have people that bring out other elements that I don't have on my leadership team as well, and help us look and think of ways differently to approach our work, because sometimes we're in the healthcare bubble all the time. So nobody on our board is in healthcare except we have one physician. Everybody else is in different industry, and I think that's very important to have other kinds of people with other kinds of experience that can collaborate and contribute to the business.
So describe how you followed your dream to create the 36,000 square foot hospice building that cost 15 million, and what were your apprehensions, and how long did it take, and what was your biggest donation?
Our biggest donation was $1.5 million, and it was an interesting process in that a large amount of our donors were not large donations. A large amount of our contributions, they were actually small donations. The average donation was probably $1,000 to $2,000, which is surprising. It's a lot of work to build that kind of, we raised $10 million for the project to do it. A lot of effort to do that. But essentially, one of the reasons why I wanted to build the building is because for those of you who aren't in Connecticut, there's not a lot of options for end-of-life care here in the state. So we have one other option in Branford, Connecticut, and it does not have private rooms. So patients are commingling at the end of life. So you have 4 patients to a room in that facility. We're not in any way linked to that facility, but I really felt that I wanted patients to have a holistic environment that they can live fully until they die. We are about living fully, not about dying. So people always think like, oh, that's where they go to die. It's really not like that here. It's about living. So our environment is really quite beautiful. And I would encourage you to go on our website and take a look at our spaces. It feels like a luxury hotel. And I knew that it was going to appeal to a kind of individual that was, there were several different people that it would appeal to. People who have a spouse who's terminally ill, who want to be a spouse, and they don't want to be a 24-hour caregiver. They can't do it. They want to be there for their loved one. They don't want to be doing the bathing, the dressing, the feeding. So I knew it would appeal to that kind of a family. Children, I have children in my facility and teenagers, and often it's very difficult for families to have their child die at home, because then they always remember their child dying at home and not living at home. And then, of course, then I also have a population of just really young patients in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, where they're really a little bit too old to be at they want to be cared for by their parents, but they really want to have their own independence, and they want to be able to have their own ability to have all their friends and family come at all hours of the night, which they couldn't do if they were living with caregivers. So it really had that kind of niche. And if you look at our census today, I have a patient who's 24, I have a patient who's 17, I have a patient who's 90 downstairs in our center. So it really runs the gamut as to why people need to be here. But because we also have the hospice home care program, people can come from the home setting into our facility when they need our care, and then they can go home if they want. So if at 2 a.m. somebody's having really difficult symptoms and families really unraveling because it's hard to be a caregiver and be caring for somebody who's very sick, we can take that person and bring them by ambulance to the building without a siren, do all of the care that they need here, get them stabilized medically, try to reduce those symptoms so they can go home, and they can go home. So it serves all these different kinds of purposes that you would never imagine for a hospice. Most people assume that people come here and die here, and that's not the case. People come here and they go home, they come here and they live here. In fact, some people come here and they like it so much they don't want to leave. They don't want to go home. So it serves many different purposes, and that was the purpose why I built the building.
So some of us on the 3 of us on the call, I know, have toured your facility. Describe a room. What is special about that room that is different than what you would find in most hospice facilities?
You can see the pictures online, but I'll talk about the patient room because that room is really pretty much one of the most important rooms for me. It's important for me that the lighting is really soft, that the room feel cozy, that it has a sense of a hotel and not a medical facility. I'm a healthcare worker, but I go into hospitals and I get anxiety. Like if I go into a room and I see all that equipment hanging out of the wall and all the tubes and it's very anxiety provoking, and I do this for a living. So I would try to imagine from a caregiver perspective what it's like for them. I don't want to see my loved one hooked up to all these tubes and I can't crawl into bed with them. So in our facility, behind the patient bed is actually a wall that has artwork on it. And behind the artwork, it moves over, is all of the equipment. So the oxygen, the suction, all the stuff that's needed for medical care is hidden behind there. So if you don't need it, which not everybody needs it, you don't have to look at it. The lighting is soft. The room has a dining room table in it. It has a couch that opens up into a queen bed. It's meant to be a medical queen bed, so it's really comfy. The bathroom is set up with, it looks like a hotel bathroom. It has custom made bedpan holders underneath the cabinetry, which is custom made, so you can't see the bedpans. There's no plastic vinyl curtain. I can't stand going into facilities and seeing these gross, mildewy curtains that people have hanging in these facilities that are just, look awful. It has a piece of glass like you'd see in a nice hotel, and the entire bathroom is a wet room so that, the patient and the caregiver has the whole space of that bathroom. It really is meant to feel like home. Every single patient bedroom has a patio, and the beds roll right onto the patio. And that's a very important thing for me, that patients can go anywhere they want in our building. They can go outside, inside, onto the patio. The whole goal is their home, and they can feel as comfortable as they want to utilize the services in the facility as much as they want to. We also have multiple living rooms. We have a spa room, we have a library, we have living rooms, and we have a giant kitchen. So it's really, when you go onto the virtual tour, you'll see it, but the patient room is pretty much, to me, the focal point.
Describe how you address the issue of growth and scalability, and then who do you see as your competitors? Do you see competitors in hospice?
Yeah, but it's interesting because remember, I've been in hospice since 1999, so a long time. And when I started in hospice, all there were visiting nurse services that did hospice care. They were licensed to do hospice care. There were no for-profit hospices. The single fastest growing industry is for-profit hospice and healthcare, which is shocking. And if you Google it, you will see that it also has the highest amount of fraud in the for-profit hospice industry than many of the other healthcare industries. In fact, one of the largest fraudulent claims ever in history last year was given to a for-profit hospice, which is owned by Roto-Rooter, the plumbing company. And they're out of Florida and Texas. And it's all public. You can Google it and see it. It's pretty horrific. But so this didn't exist when I started in hospice 20 years ago. And unfortunately, the industry has changed. There's still a lot of wonderful, wonderful nonprofit hospices like ours that take care of patients regardless of their ability to pay. But unfortunately, like a lot of healthcare, we've seen a tremendous amount of changes.
What makes Danbury Hospice so different? Well, you've kind of already, let's skip that. You have a tagline, make the best of every day. Yeah. How do you personally manage to make the best of every day, knowing that the people entering your facility have an expiration period?
Well, first I'll talk about scalability because we didn't get into that. And that is that we built a building that's so successful that we take care of 1,400 patients a year on average, both within our building and then within all of Connecticut. So regional hospice services a giant territory in Connecticut. So we take care of patients in the home, in assisted living facilities, in nursing homes, and then here in our center. So it's a lot of different levels of care that we care for. The organization, we've had this building for 6 years. The organization's been around almost 40. And we know that this model works, and it works well if it's set up correctly. And one of the most important things about the model is the people. Because as you know, you can build a beautiful nursing home or a beautiful hospital, and unless you have great staff and great team and wonderful volunteers, it means nothing without the people. So we really are very careful about who we hire. We're careful about making sure that people are committed to the mission and really believe in what we do, and that they treat our patients like we treat them as though they're our own parents. So that's really important. And that goes along with the making the best of every day. I think people hear the H word, they hear hospice often, and they get very frightened and they want to step back and they think hospice is the last minutes and hours before death, and that's actually not the case at all. Hospice is 6 months before somebody dies, they're eligible to go on hospice care. And if you have Medicare, you've paid into hospice your whole life because there's a very robust Medicare hospice benefit that people don't even know exists. So most people that come onto our Medicare hospice program don't ever even pay a dime for care because it's already covered in their Medicare services. And the same goes for private insurance. Most private insurance carriers have a hospice end-of-life benefit that has very little, if any, out of pocket for people. So people don't realize it exists. So I mentioned it's months, not hours and days. And that also means, how do we make the best of every moment, of every hour, of every day that we have left for any of us, right? We don't have to be sick or diagnosed with anything to do that. That should just be our normal way of living, right? We make the best of every day. We all know in COVID, we've all learned about life. We all knew life was precious, right? But boy, are we really seeing it differently with COVID, that people are grieving all sorts of losses, grief, regular physical grief losses, and also loss of life and loss of regular routine. Making the best of every day is a tagline that's important, because that's what we're doing regardless of a diagnosis and regardless of a life expectancy of months or short amount of time.
This question I didn't have on your list, but I do know you took care of some of the people from Sandy Hook. What did you do? How did you decide to do that? How did you accomplish that? And what was your program that you offered?
So in our 36,000 square foot building, we have a bereavement center, and it's called the Healing Heart Center for Grief and Loss. And we have always, as part of one of our missions and focus of care, is to provide bereavement in the community to anybody who needs it. So usually Sundays and Mondays, we do bereavement groups here in the building, and anybody can come. They don't have had to use our hospice service. They might have had a loved one who got hit by a car and died. It could be any kind of tragedy, any bereavement, any grief that they need help with. And families come to our center for that. It's a free service. We've done it for 35 years, and we've taken care of thousands of people who've had grief and loss. When there is a tragedy at the local schools, like a teacher who gets killed or something awful happens in a school, the schools will usually call us and say, we need grief counselors to help address this with our teachers and our counseling team, because most counselors don't usually have grief experience. So we've done a lot of that over the years. So anytime there was a tragedy in the school, we would usually be called in, because a number of us, including myself, is trained in trauma and grief, because I'm a therapist by background. That's my training. So when Sandy Hook happened, one of our board of directors is Chuck Herrick, and Chuck is a psychiatrist at Danbury Hospital. He actually chairs the entire psychiatry department for 7 hospitals. But when that happened, Sandy Hook is only 5 miles. For those of you who are not in Connecticut, Sandy Hook is 5 miles from Danbury, so it's very close. And Chuck called us and said, would you guys be willing to help the schools, because they don't even know how to even have these conversations. And then even more difficult is, how do we have these conversations with parents and families that their children are not coming home? So what happened was, Joanna DiNicola, who's one of our very fabulously trained therapists, went and sat down with 4 families and had that conversation with their kids, the remaining children, that the child had been killed and was not going to come home. That is, to me, one of the hardest conversations you can have as a therapist. And we then springboarded into a dialogue with St. Rose's Church, and St. Rose's Church asked us to spearhead the grandparents group. So we've been hosting a grandparents group for Sandy Hook survivors since it happened, so a long time. And we still have it, and it still gets together. And a lot of, in that time, as you recall, there were very few school shootings. So there were not a lot of grandparents who had experienced this. Now, unfortunately, we're in an entirely different world where there's a lot of school shootings, but the issues of grief and loss for a grandparent who's lost a child to a horrible, violent crime is very different sometimes than when somebody's child dies of an illness. So it was really important for that support group for the grandparents to come together and be there for each other. And then since then, we also have a number of Sandy Hook volunteers who volunteer in our building. We have a beautiful playground that's dedicated by the Sandy Hook. A number of Sandy Hook kids raised $50,000 for our playground. Our playhouse is named after Charlotte Bacon. Her family donated our playhouse. So, we've done everything we can for the community to help support it and continue to support, the tragedy that happened and how people get through that over time.
What lessons have you personally learned from your patients?
So I refer to them as my sacred moments. I have a lot of sacred moments. And over the years, there's a number of kind of life-defining moments that I've had with patients. My first one being really the one that kind of spurred me to build the building. I had a woman who was a patient. She was young. She was in her early 40s in Rowayton, which is a very beautiful town in Connecticut. She had 3 daughters, and her husband had died on a basketball court, like playing, and had a massive heart attack. Young guy, you know, maybe he was 40, a couple of years prior. So she was raising her 3 girls by herself. She had the Ashkenazi breast cancer gene. So she ended up, her 3 sisters all had died before her. And she was raising her own 3 girls, and then she got breast cancer. And she was one of my, probably one of those patients I will never forget, because she was leaving her 3 girls to one of her best friends in California, because her sisters were all gone, her parents were gone, her husband had died. It was terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy. And she was in such difficult denial over the fact that she was going to die. She really just wasn't willing to have the conversation with her girls. So we were like literally biting our nails, bleeding practically, thinking, oh my gosh, this woman is going to die and she's never going to have a letter. She won't have said goodbye to her girls. You know, there was so much closure that needed to be done in such a short amount of time. And she was one of the reasons I came back from that house one night and said, we need to build a building, because somebody like her should have been in our building, because she was going to die in her house with her girls there. Make a long story short, one evening at about 2 o'clock in the morning, she called our nurse and asked her if she'd be willing to bring her a pack of cigarettes. She hadn't smoked since she was like 16. And she's like, I want to smoke a cigarette. I haven't smoked one since I was 16. And our nurse went and said, absolutely. Went, you know, we wear many hats in hospice. Went and got a pack of cigarettes, drove over to her house, unhooked her oxygen and let her smoke a cigarette. But it really wasn't about that. It was the moment of standing outside her house while her daughters were sleeping. And the nurse said, maybe our nurse had a cigarette with her. I don't know. But had that conversation about, what if this doesn't go your way and you don't get through this? What do you want your girls to know and remember about you in life? And she started talking about it, and our nurse said, can I start writing some of this down for you? And she said, yes. And so our nurse helped write a letter. It was a really pivotal letter for those girls. And I believe it really makes a difference from a bereavement perspective for people when people do that. And she ended up dying, and the girls ended up going out to California, and it was one of the most tragic cases that I remember in my career. And it really was one of the springboards to building this building, because we would have had all the support systems in the building to take care of her and the girls, and which we didn't have then. But that was a pretty pivotal moment for me as a mother, learning too. I wasn't a mother at the time, but when I became a mother, learning how important it is as parents and grandparents or what have you, to make sure you leave those letters, you write those notes, you record those messages for your kids and your whomever, it could be your siblings, so that you have those memories preserved. Really, really important.
You have a mission to take the taboo out of dying. Provide some examples of how you are doing that.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if any of you have looked at our website, but we have 3 animated commercials on our website. They were done by a fellow colleague that Vicki and Joyce and I know, named Marvin Waldman.
Marvin.
Yeah, he was the director of Young and Rubicam many years ago. He was the head of advertising and creative director for them. Super creative, super out of the box thinker. And I reached out to him a couple of years ago and I said, Marvin, I really want to do a series of commercials about what we do, but I don't want to have a commercial where the nurse has got her arm over his shoulder and, you know, the typical stuff that you see in all these healthcare ads. And Marvin said to me, what do you think about doing an animated campaign? And I was like, oh, I don't know, Marvin, that may be a little edgy for us. And he put together this campaign, and we're now on our 4th commercial. So I would encourage you to go look at it online. But very different, very unique, very out of the box. And it takes a very difficult topic, which is death and dying, and really addresses it from a perspective that we all experience, whether it's our parent or a spouse or a child. And it tells a funny story, each one of them, about the different experiences that people have had.
You have a campaign called Emily's Wish.
Mm-hmm.
Describe that and what its purpose is.
So the next project that I'm working on now that we're raising money for, we're raising $5 million for the construction and $15 million for our overall new campaign goal to build a children's wing. So my building has 12 patient suites, which if you can imagine, 12 patient suites turn over quite a bit. So people say to me, wow, that's a small amount of patients in the building. But imagine I still have hundreds of patients in the community every day. So I have mobile teams that go out to see them. But every day I usually have 1 or 2 kids that come into the center, or I have a lot of kids that I take care of at home. And I wanted to have something that was just for them. I wanted to have a children's wing that just had a kids feel to it, had a, the ability for kids to run around. So we are going to be one of only 5 children's hospices in the entire country, and the only one in the Northeast that's building. So we're hoping to build next year, and it's 4 patient suites, and it's named after, the campaign is named after Emily, which is one of the children in our commercial, in the Beep Beep commercial. And it's a true story of a patient that we cared for in the center, and why having a children's wing is so important. Having something just for kids is really pretty pivotal. And it has a different feel than the regular patient wing that we have. So we're building that next year, hopefully, fingers crossed. And it's an 18,000 square foot space. And as I said, it'd be one of only 5 in the country. So I feel pretty proud of that.
You have a successful model in Danbury, and you have a goal to want to take it other places. Mm-hmm. Name some of those cities you'd like to explore, why those, and where are you in that next step?
Well, the next project for us is the children's wing. Once the children's wing is done, then we can look at something more global for regional hospice. But right now our goal is to really get the children's wing done next year, and it should be open in 2 years, which is going to come fairly quickly. I know that this model works. It's super effective. It's a nonprofit model. We know that our census is full all the time. But when I've looked at other geographic areas around the country, I know that it would also do well in Dallas. It would do well in Santa Barbara, California. It would do well in Scottsdale, Arizona, and perhaps Denver, Colorado, in places that have a large geographical area of geriatric population, but also where there's a center of influence and a center of affluence. Because when you have that, that helps in terms of the nonprofit piece of it, right? Because we're able to raise significant money to do what we do, and because of that, we're allowed to take care of patients, regardless of their ability to pay, even though we have paying people as well. But mission-wise, it's so important that that is not an issue for people. Everybody has the right to die with dignity and respect, and so important. Like, we shouldn't be saying to people, you need to have this kind of insurance or that kind of insurance in order to be cared for in a building like ours. That's just not how we operate. We believe everybody has the right to that kind of care. And I know that this kind of model would do well in those other cities. So those are some of the areas that I'd be interested in learning more about what the other options are. We started to study it a little bit. Right now our focus is really the children's wing, but that will be something that I think this organization can do long term. I think we can change the face of death and dying. I think that you don't see a lot of these kinds of facilities around the country. There aren't a lot. And the reason why you don't see them is because for-profit companies don't want to have them because they're expensive. But when you look at the quality of care and you look at our outcomes, we are #1 in the state in terms of our outcomes of care, #1. And there's 28 other hospices in Connecticut, none of which we're affiliated with. So, and we service a lot of patients. So why not raise the bar, right? And offer this kind of care in multiple locations where we know it's needed.
So you have a health challenge that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Describe that, where you're at with that.
So I'm the lucky winner of a very rare lung disease called LAM. I found out about it by accident a couple of years ago, and I feel like it's kind of one of those things that, isn't it ironic that a person who runs a hospice got diagnosed with kind of a really strange thing. And I don't talk about it, too much publicly, because it's something that I still grapple with. I'm very fortunate, knock on wood, that I'm healthy and that I thankfully don't have a lot of symptoms, and I get through it. However, it has dramatically changed how I understand what our patients are going through. So when somebody tells me, oh, you have no idea what it was like to get bad news or to hear this, I know exactly, as many of us I'm sure on the call who've dealt with health issues know what it's like to get bad news. You have that moment where you feel like you're in that tunnel, and are they really saying what they're saying? And you don't even really hear everything the doctor's saying because you're in such shock about what's being told to you. But I truly believe it's been a gift to me. It really has. And in the beginning, I didn't feel that way. In the beginning, I was very, upset, and it was very tough. It's taken me a few years to get to this place, but I truly feel like it's a gift. and it allows me an opportunity to look at life and death differently. Not that I wasn't already looking at it, but I really take the bucket list. I take my bucket list very seriously. Like, I check off my bucket list items as I go. And I do all of those things that I feel like everybody should be doing for their kids and their grandkids and their spouses. And that is writing letters to my children, doing, I do video, my gratitude journal on video on my phone. I do videos to my kids that I just, little things. I want you to know about how to properly weed a garden. It could be something completely silly, but all of those things are things that I really embrace. And I try to teach that to the families that I meet too, because I'll give you a quick example. I had a patient a week and a half ago who was in the building, and he was 37. He was a spouse. His wife was only 40, who was here with us. She was dying of a rare cancer, and their child, who was 5, was running around the room, this cute little kindergartner. And I walked in to meet him because a donor had asked me to introduce myself to him, and I typically will do rounds in the building and visit with patients on a weekend. And this was and I walked into a fight happening between the two of them. They were arguing ferociously about a very stupid, benign issue, dumb issue. And I realized I was walking in on a fight, and I tried to kind of very slowly and carefully work my way out of the room. And she said to me, "Are you a therapist?" And I said, "Well, I am. You know, I hadn't introduced myself. I'm happy to." And she said, "Please come in and sit down. We need your help." They didn't even know who I was. I said, "Okay." So I sat down and started helping facilitate a conversation. And it became very evident at that moment, they were focusing on a stupid little problem that really had nothing that they were going to fix in this amount of time. And the conversation that I'm having with the husband is, you have a very infinite amount of time left with your wife. Infinite, very small, right? Let's figure out, or finite, let's figure out a way to get rid of this stuff that doesn't matter, because none of that matters. It doesn't matter what happened in your marriage. It doesn't matter that you fought with your in-laws, you know, for 10 years. None of that matters. Let's take the time we have left and come up with a constructive way to put resolution to some of those issues. Let's put closure to some of those issues so they're not hanging on for the rest of your life. But you have a very small window to spend time with your wife and forgive each other for the mistakes you made. Don't waste time. And so I take that kind of story and I use that story with people who aren't even sick, right? I mean, people forget, right? You have people that go out the door and they get hit by a car and die, and they're like, "Oh my God, the last thing I said to them was this horrible fight." Same kind of thing. We have to remind people, and I do this in my everyday life, be thankful for what you have the day you have it today, because we don't know what tomorrow brings. Make sure you loved your loved ones and tell them. And forget the little bullshit crap that people have that are fights. Those things don't matter. Really focus on the stuff that matters as much as you can, because I was so sad to see this couple go through this. It was so unnecessary, right? It was they're wasting time on something that really didn't matter. So I try to use that in my everyday life. I really try to remind myself of that constantly, that, you know, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, how would I be very happy? Would my kids feel like I lived a life that had a good legacy? And I really try to do that as much as possible.
So I want to allow time for questions. I just want to ask you one last question. What's next for you? Is there a next?
The children's wing is a very important goal for me. It's a very important goal, because my friend Leslie would have been in the wing like this. It's not just children, it's high schoolers too, and kids up to 21. It's a personal thing for me, just like my building has been a personal, really a personal mission for me. I really live and breathe my work, which, as we all know, can be tough, right? Because of what I do, but it's everything to me. And so the children's wing is really important. And then I think also really trying to allow people to advocate for good death, and that death doesn't have to be scary and ugly and horrible, and it can be beautiful and life altering and moments you never forget. You never forget that moment when your loved one dies. So let's make it as beautiful as possible, so that you at least know that you gave them a gift of that experience. And that I will continue to do that as a mission, because I think that we have an opportunity to make change in the American culture. We have come a long way from 1999 when I started in this work. We still have a long way to go, and I think that we also could really do some more globally in terms of how far we've come. Some countries are heads and tails above us, and some are really behind us in terms of looking at end of life. But we still have a lot of work to do in this country in terms of how people are cared for and the conversations that they have at the end of life, and how healthcare professionals have those conversations with people. That's a really important one.
Okay. I'm going to pause and let anyone who's joined us to ask Cynthia a question.
Cynthia, this is Gary. You were talking about other locations you might be looking at in the country. I do a lot of work in Florida and Arizona. Pinellas County, which is Clearwater, Largo, and so forth. Pinellas County could be an incredible spot for you, as well as Collier County, which is Naples. I'll send you an email a little bit later, and then I agree with your Scottsdale, Arizona, because that really feeds the entire Phoenix metro area. But I know that I'm somewhat familiar with some of the hospice programs in those areas. I have not seen or heard about anything quite like what you've done. So those might be worthwhile areas. And in both Pinellas County and in Scottsdale, there are some pretty significant faith-based nonprofit communities who would find a relationship with you really worth exploring. So I'll just offer that as a couple of thoughts.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, we should catch up offline too.
Gary, tell everyone what you do.
Right now, I spend a lot of time in an easy chair trying to take care of this crazy situation I'm in. Right now, I have two areas of work at a company called the Goodman Group. We have about 70 communities around the country. Half are senior living and healthcare, and the rest are residential. And part of my work is mergers and acquisitions, which I'm thankful for because I can do that by internet for the most part. And I was asked to come back to the Goodman Group after I'd retired because my friend John Goodman passed away unexpectedly. Secondly, I've been very passionately involved in the area of dementia care. I spend a lot of time with Zooming these days with caregivers who are primary caregivers for loved ones living with dementia. And most recently, I started doing some innovative work with grandchildren of grandparents where one is living with dementia. So that's what I do.
Anyone else have a question for Cynthia?
Cynthia, I was very moved by everything you said and your empathy and sensitivity to how we approach death. Two questions. What do you think about death doulas? And how can we educate a population to think this way? Because I think COVID has made us all think about our mortality and how we deal with day-to-day trauma and issues. And I wish I could just package you and bring you to Philadelphia. How do we get you to Philadelphia? We'll fundraise.
Yeah, I'm happy to come to Philadelphia with a mask on, though. So I have to say, looking back, there was so few conversations about this in 1999. So we have come really a long way from where we were. We have a long way to go. I do think COVID actually will serve a healthy purpose in having these conversations because COVID has affected everybody, right? Has not discriminated against anyone. So everybody in some level has been impacted by COVID. I guess like diseases are as well, like if you have but it's been a really life-altering experience for people. So there's a great opportunity to say, well, since this happened, I think we need to have this dialogue and how we talk about grief. And so that's the first thing. But I think secondly, I think we have to continue to advocate for these conversations in healthcare. I have a donor right now that I'm working with, and the physician who's caring for this patient, the patient's only 60. The physician doesn't really want to be honest with the family about the fact that they're dying. Well, how is that possible in 2020 that a physician isn't willing to have that conversation? It's still very, very much a problem. So we have got to be educating our physicians and our healthcare professionals that these conversations need to happen because people need a support system in place to provide for them. They need to know in advance. This is what's happening. When my loved one has dementia, we should be having conversations about end of life. We should be having advanced directive conversations because with dementia patients and Alzheimer's patients, we know that the ability to swallow dissipates. So that's a really important conversation that needs to happen when somebody is cognizant of that. Again, I think it's just about, doing more education, getting out there, being more public about it. Zoom is a great way now that we're on Zoom to be able to do more meetings and be able to do more educational resource kind of events to teach people about, what the questions they need to ask their healthcare professionals, because that's a big one, but also how do you advocate for your friends and family and loved ones?
What about death doulas?
Death doulas are a really important piece. So we have a very robust volunteer program here. Unfortunately, it's kind of on hold. So it's because of the COVID thing where we only have partial volunteers back in the building. And death doulas are pivotal to our work. So we do have volunteers who are trained as grief and bereavement volunteers that come in and actually will be at bedside with a patient if that is the wish of the family, to have somebody there all the time, meaning that nobody ever leaves. So there's always a person present. Interestingly, sometimes patients aren't always willing to die if there's always somebody there. I've seen this all the time. You have a whole family waiting around the bed, everybody's, hovering over the patient, and the patient doesn't pass, and they don't pass, and they don't pass, and everybody's wondering why they're hanging on, and then everybody dissipates to go to the bathroom or the restroom or out to get a bite to feed, eat, and that person dies. And then everybody's really upset that they weren't there when the loved one dies. Sometimes that's how people have to die. It's too hard for them to die in front of their loved ones. And so they wait, I believe, it's my personal opinion, to leave this planet when it's their time. So death doulas serve us a really good purpose in terms of patients who are alone or scared or want that. And then there's the other side of it, which some patients don't really want people right at the bedside with them every minute of every day. But death doulas are a very important part of the work because it also normalizes dying in a way that I think is very healthy.
Sandy, you had a question.
Oh, I have a lot of questions, Cynthia. I always admire your
Thanks, Sandy. Good to see you.
Your innovation. You have to take it national. It's so terrific. Just a couple of things. I work with financial service professionals, and I'm trying really hard to get them to think about care planning and also end of life other than life insurance as an end of life tool. So I wondered if you worked with them. Secondly, I wondered if you have an opinion about in-home hospice versus residential, and what some of the decision trees are around that. And that's the second question. And then third, do you know CPAC, that organization, the Coalition to Transform Advanced Care? Because it's a movement of palliative care associations teamed up with hospitals, and it's something of a commercial venture, but they do have nonprofits. So I've given you the rest. I think I've taken up too much of the time if you have to answer all three of those.
That's okay. So I'll start with the first, the one that I think is of the most important for this population, and that is inpatient hospice versus home. Everybody usually says that they want their loved one to be at home. I would say that about myself too. Often it is not the best plan, because if I were dying at home, I would have to have all my family taking care of me, doing the physical part of it. I'm in my house, all those things. My kids can't be my kids. My friends can't be their friends. Everybody's doing the physical part of it. But when you're in the center here, we take care of all of that. So a spouse can come in and be a spouse, and then they can leave. Child can do their part, and doesn't feel like they are putting all their efforts and time into the physical care part of it, and instead they're emotionally available for their loved ones. And so while home often is what people want, in the end, it isn't always the best option. And sometimes people really resist that because they think like, oh, this is the way it has to be. And it doesn't have to be that way. There's options for people. Do you want me to answer the other questions, or do you want to hold over Joyce to?
If other people have questions, that's fine.
We do, Sandy, work with financial professionals. We work with elder care attorneys. Shinky, who's on our call, is an attorney as well, and we do a lot of work with Mary. Attorneys are a really important part of our work, because most times when families are making those decisions and they're working with their attorney on their planning and their, whatever it may be, maybe their estate planning. It's a great opportunity for an attorney to say, have you considered this? Have you done an advance directive? And let's talk about what that looks like, not just from the perspective of the healthcare piece, but also what are your wishes? There's a great form called the 5 Wishes. I don't know if you've seen it, and it talks about, you know, how would you like to be buried? Would you like to be buried versus cremated? What do you want to be dressed in? How do you want to be remembered in a memorial service? All of those are things that we often do here in hospice care. We have those conversations with family members, and we try to teach people to ask those questions and have those. We have a little deck of cards that has funny questions on it, like called dialogue cards. Like, if you were a superhero, what would your superhero character be? And then the next question might be, what's your fondest memory of your childhood? And then the next one might be, how do you want to be remembered if I die? So there's a lot of light, fun things in this deck of cards, but there's also some heavier, more deep questions that people need to answer. And so when families are really struggling with those conversations because it's scary for them, or maybe they didn't have a family that talked about those kinds of things, we try to integrate those cards into the room. We leave them in all the patient rooms, and then people will go through them. And it's a nice dialogue. It can be light, doesn't all have to be heavy, but it's a nice way to comb in some of these very heavy topics into really kind of fun memories of something.
Yeah, I think 5 Wishes is a great site for people to know about. And I think too, it's really care planning. You know, how do you want your care delivered if you have dementia? And it's the non-financial as well as the financial and the legal, you know, and you do it all. So great.
Thank you, Sandy.
So I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
I think Carol has a question too.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim,
go ahead, Tim.
Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry that I missed your intro. I was actually talking to a donor, and she was in hospice, and so I want to get back on. But I have never been so excited to hear about hospice until I was listening to you, and I'm going, what is going on here? But the way you brought things up in terms of the advantages of having a place like that takes away from, so that people are more emotionally available, I think is really, really powerful. My question to you is, what is it about the American culture? What is one thing that we really have to get over with in terms of death and dying that you feel is so critical?
I think it's fear. I think people really fear death, or they fear pain, or they fear discomfort. And what I try to teach families is that our goal is to make the patient as comfortable as possible, but also as cognizant as possible, so they can communicate their wishes and have fun and loving conversations with their loved ones, but at the same time be comfortable. Because I think people really fear being sick. They fear I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to feel pain, or I don't want to feel suffering. And I can understand that. It's horrible to watch when somebody suffers. I mean, no one wants to watch their loved one suffer. But when someone's in really good hospice care, there shouldn't be suffering. There should be no physical suffering. Often there's emotional suffering because people are leaving their loved ones and they're working through what that's like for them, especially if they're 35 years old and they're leaving little kids behind, versus sometimes my 110-year-olds are really having a lot of emotional suffering, and they've lived really long, beautiful lives. Everybody comes to this world with their own set of issues, but I think fear is a big one, and I think we have to be willing to have the conversation and not be so afraid to talk about it. And it's not a failure of the healthcare system that we have hospice. It's actually an adjunct to the healthcare system. When doctors say to patients, there's nothing more I can do for you, so I'm sorry I can't offer you an additional chemo or radiation or whatever, you need to kind of go home and figure out your plans. That's a horrible thing for a doctor to say to a patient. Why not say, there's this beautiful program I can talk to you about called hospice care or palliative care, and this is why it's going to be very helpful to you. And this is the support system I can help put in place for you, because your chemo radiation isn't continuing to work for you. And there isn't a cure, but there is palliation of symptoms that we can offer to you. And that kind of way of twisting it around is so different. And people, unfortunately, are not being told that. And that's very much, I think, an American culture issue. It really is. I don't see that necessarily all around the world. And Americans struggle with that. Healthcare professionals struggle with saying that, the treatment that was gazillion dollars didn't work. And I wish they would often have those conversations with people earlier than later, because that's the other thing. Patients come to me after these, 5 million treatments that they've had, and they're so sick. They can't function, they can't walk, they can't talk, they can't eat. They lose their ability to have any taste. They're miserable, they're depressed. And if only the doctor had said to them, this treatment really isn't, it's a last ditch effort. And the chances of it working are really, really small. And you can either get yourself a better quality of life for the time you have left, or you can do this very experimental treatment, which is going to make you extremely sick and miserable. I don't think people would choose that treatment. And often, if you look at the statistics, JAMA did a research article 4 years ago now, that said that hospice patients live longer than patients who are not on hospice. People who are terminally ill live longer in hospice than they do in regular care. Because I think people give up this horrible chemical treatment and say, I'm just going to live my life and let my body do what it needs to do naturally. And I wish more people would be willing to have that conversation, because it takes a lot of courage to be willing to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, you had a question?
No.
No? Okay. Anyone else have a question?
Lynn, unmute yourself.
Pardon me?
Lynn has a question, but she has to unmute herself.
There we go. I just want to kind of back up what you're saying, Cynthia. My mother was in hospice care at her nursing home, and she got such good care from them. She graduated from hospice and lived another year and a half. And we thought we had lost her. And it was really all because of hospice coming in and doing the wonderful things that they do. So I have a question for you. I was just so impressed with the staff who came by and how they not only handled her, but how they handled me and asked me questions about my mother, you know, that made me really remember how wonderful she had been before she got ill. And so it got me thinking about the people who do this. It's difficult work, and yet they seem to love it. Are there things that you do at your facility to help staff with the difficult work, to keep the morale up? And you mentioned when you hire people, you try to get them, you know, on the same page. This is our vision. This is what we do. I'm curious about the backstory to some of that.
That is a really, thank you for saying that, Lynn. I think that we do have graduates too. And I always love when we have graduates, because that's great, right? They have found themselves in a better place. And then they usually come back a year or two later, and that's always a wonderful thing to have happen. And so I'm always happy when we have graduates. We don't have a lot, but we do have some. One of the most important parts of my job and my role is making sure that staff stay fresh, that they don't get fried, because I can see it coming. You know, I can kind of tell when I can tell an employee is really struggling, especially my pediatric nurses, because that's so difficult. But I kind of see it coming. But one of the things we do is we have very specific things in our foundation of our work. So we don't have productivity standards that are unreasonable. So nurses are not expected to see more than 4 patients a day. Some days they may go see a patient and they may unravel their whole day, and they may not be able to go see 3 other patients because they're seeing the one patient, the patient's really struggling. So we are very unique in that we have a reasonable requirement in terms of visits. We are very flexible about that staff. We are primarily a female-driven business. So knowing that we're a female-driven business and we have a lot of single moms here, myself included, we have a whole kitchen here that runs 14 hours a day. So we do at-home dinners for staff. It's $20 at the dinner for 4, and anybody can buy it at any level in the organization. Anyone can reserve one, and they can take it home to their families. They don't have to cook. I can't tell you how many nurses work the day shift and leave here at 7 and take food home because they're too tired to cook. They're too tired to do that. And some of them even like pack it for their kids' lunches the next day. We augment our food costs for our staff. So most of our staff eat here, and we provide lunch and dinner and breakfast to them too. And while there's a small nominal charge for them, we cover the rest of that cost, which I think is an important piece. And then lastly, and probably one of the most important things we do is something called care of the caregiver. And that is we have a therapist come in for the home health aides or CNAs who do most of the hard work, the lifting, the feeding, the dressing, the bathing, physically grueling work. And she meets with them every 6 weeks, and it's mandatory. All of our CNAs have to go to it. I have no idea what they talk about at those meetings. They have a meditation, they do debriefing, they talk about difficult patients they've had, they talk about things that have made them sad. That has been a really important part of our success because it's completely confidential. I don't have a clue and I don't need to know, but I know that they're getting some TLC for themselves. The same thing goes for massage and aromatherapy. We have a full-time massage therapist on staff that does massage for patients, but also a lot of massage for employees. Very important. I can kind of tell when I know an employee has had a really difficult time, and I'll say, you know, Jen Bell is our massage therapist. We call her Zen Jen. I'll say to her, you know, Jen, you need to go talk to so-and-so. I think they need a session with you. Or she'll set up a chair massage in the staff room, and she'll do a chair massage for 20 minutes for different staff members. That is a huge, important part of TLC, because healthcare workers tend to not take care of themselves. So sometimes we have to institutionalize it in order for them to do it. We say it's important, you need to take advantage of it, and you need to do that. The other thing we do is we do parties. So we haven't in COVID, but we do a Halloween party every year, which is a big deal. And we did it last year. People take it very seriously, our Halloween party. It's only for staff. No volunteers are allowed to come, and people take the, you know, some of our team members do. We had our entire patient center. They did the Wizard of Oz theme, and they all were Wizard of Oz, including our CNAs who were the Munchkins, you know, from that. So it was so much fun, and just an opportunity to do something out of the building. That's lots of fun. That we don't talk about patients. That takes everybody out of their comfort zone. And we're trying to figure out what we're going to do this year because of COVID. We're going to have to do something maybe with masks and social distancing. I don't know, but those are the kinds of things that we do that are different, and they're investments. They're not, you know, they cost money, but they're really important. And if I usually query the staff, they will say, like, it's really nice to go out to dinner with you. So I'll do nursing dinners where I'll take small groups of nurses out for dinner just with me. And I don't invite any other managers, none of the supervisors, and they just have an opportunity one-on-one to spend time with me. And it's just nice for them to know that they can come to me directly if there's a concern. If they want to just vent about something that's bothering them, they share that. So all of those things are really important and make us, I think, unique and different.
That's great. Thank you. That's nice to hear.
Yeah. It's not easy though. Yeah, it's not easy work.
No.
We're coming up on 5:06. We like to start on time and end on time.
There's Marvin Waldman.
Pardon me?
Marvin Waldman is on the call.
Yeah. And speaking of Marvin and I have been having a little side conversation. If anyone would like to see one of those little clips that they talked about earlier, Cynthia, if that's okay with you, and anybody wants to stay after to see one of the clips, Marvin said to ask you which one of them would you want to show. So figure that
Marvin,
out.
you have to show your newest one, which is not Fred.
Okay, all right.
But they're also
By the way,
also
Cynthia,
on our website too.
Yeah, by the way, Cynthia, you did great, and you look great. Thank
you, Marvin.
Yeah, I actually am much better looking in person, but Cynthia did forget something about the hospice. A major bet. They have the best cookies. I'm telling you, the best cookies ever.
That's true.
And it is true, and it's worth a visit to look around and try to get some cookies. They're terrific. It is really a magical kind of place. You don't feel depressed there. That's and for me that's a big statement. That it really is a life affirming place. And just for a point in terms of the campaign, one of the reasons we did the campaign the way we did, and Cynthia and her team were majorly involved with the whole thing from beginning to end, is that people confuse, John Cleese said this, people confuse solemnity with seriousness. And sometimes you needn't be solemn to deliver a serious message. In fact, sometimes not being solemn gets that serious message across better. And I think that's important, even with a subject like death. There's no reason that there can't be a certain lightness to it, because a lightness to it gives a feeling that it now is more approachable, something you could talk about. And that was also one of the reasons for doing the campaign. It's to get people talking about the end of life, perhaps earlier. And that's key. Okay, that's it. But yeah, I'll thank you.
So Marvin is the one I mentioned earlier that designed and did all of our animated commercials. So we have our fourth one launching, Not Fred, which is a spouse commercial, which is great.
And how did we decide people would be able, those on the call would be able to see it?
You can see it right on our website. So if you go to regionalhospicect.org, or if you go to makingthebestofeveryday.org, you can see them all on the website too.
Okay, great. So I know this is I hate to cut things off, but I hate to keep people on. I want to be respectful of your time and respectful of Cynthia's time as well. This is a very, I don't want to say, very important topic. And there's a friend, several of us on the call know a lady who wrote a book called Final Gifts. And her name is Maggie Callanan. She's a hospice nurse. And for any of you interested in reading a book about the stories of when somebody, about the families and dying at home and what the dying patient knows, even if somebody is missing, who should be present before they move on. It's a really great book, and it's filled with very, very moving stories. But I want to share one, there's comments in the chat room, and I want to share one comment. Cynthia, I don't know if you've been following it, and it says, Cynthia, your presentation today was fantastic. Having used hospice for my parents, I realized the value of the services offered. I'd like to know how I could support your organization and help it offer more services throughout the U.S. So with that, I'd like to just say, and that's from Paul Mayer, who's been weaving in and out, trying to stay connected to us using his phone. So Cynthia, if you just offer some information about people, how people can get involved.
Yeah, so you're welcome to email me, and Vicki and Joyce can share my email. Please do. I'm always open to questions. I have done a fair amount of speaking, so if there's something you want me to come speak to, I'm happy to come talk to your group or do a Zoom call or whatever it may be. I feel like the more we get out there and we share this message, the more we're going to be able to grow, the better philosophy get about end of life and change the equation about how people look at death and dying. You can support us a couple different ways. If you live in Connecticut and you want to volunteer, please consider volunteering for us. We have volunteers that do all sorts of different things. They work in our garden, they do volunteering in the building, they go through our volunteer training program, which we're now going to be doing online. There's lots of different ways people can help in that way. We have a gala committee. There's lots of those kinds of opportunities, all different variety. So that's one way, and you can go right on our website to our volunteer page. You come in through that way. You could donate to us. We are a nonprofit, so donations are always welcome. Please consider that. If you go to our webpage, there's a donate now button. And it could continue to talk about this, continue to advocate, continue to have these conversations. And if you know of somebody who knows of somebody that can support us, maybe you don't have, the connections or, the financial wherewithal to give lots of millions of dollars, but you know a foundation that can, please introduce us to them, because be amazed how people, know somebody that they've lived next door with for 30 years and their father or their brother is, the head of a huge foundation. So Doug Renfield Miller, who's on our call today, is one of my board members, and Mary Schinke, we all are working on, trying to raise funds for this children's wing. But also, if that's not their interest and they want to give money, for other things, we welcome any opportunity to have both an advocacy discussion, education, and, donation opportunity. So thank you for that, Vicki.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. It was very, very, you're excellent at what you do. And
thank you.
Inspiring to
thank
those
you.
of us
well,
who
please email me. Let me know if there's something more you have questions about, or if there's something I didn't cover, or if there's something that's sensitive that you didn't want to say on the call. You're welcome to email me. It's croy@regionalhospicect.org, and Vicki can share my information. Please email me. All the time I hear from people after I do an educational session where they say, oh, I forgot to ask that, or I didn't want to ask that in front of a group, or something in particular. I'm happy to reach out and talk with people. I think the more we network and communicate and work with each other, I think that the better that this work that we're doing will become. So thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to see faces I haven't seen in a while too.
Okay, thank you. And
thank you, Cynthia. That was great.
Great, thanks, Marvin.
Okay, two things. Cynthia, is it croy@ctregionalhospice.org?
No. So it's CROY@regionalhospicect.org.
Okay, we got the regional hospice. CT goes after that.
Regional
Okay.
Hospice at, yeah, croy@regionalhospicect.org.
.org. Got it.
Mhm.
Okay, for everyone, if you're interested in the chat room comments, I just put Cynthia's email address at the end. Just scroll up and save it, and just do a copy, and then copy it wherever you want on your own computer, and you'll have A, comments, and B, Cynthia's email at the bottom.
Hey, Joyce, do you want to say who's coming up next week?
That's right. Next week we have Audrey Sleuthman, and Audrey's wonderful. She's actually a corporate trainer. She's an entrepreneur, has 2 businesses, and her whole talk next week is going to be about embrace the environment. I think it's something like embrace COVID, but it's really embrace the mess that we're in and make the best of it. And she's drawing from all of the talks that she does to give the tips on what works best in this kind of environment. So she lives in New York City. She travels all over the world, and she'll join us next week. So if you're free, join us next week, 4 o'clock, same time, same station.
And we're working on our website. We will be soon having, hopefully, by the end of this week, information about our 5 consecutive week Primed for Purpose series that we're now creating a membership organization. And we are, with our Pause for Purpose, we refer to this as our freemium model. We are now going into our membership model with the 5 consecutive weeks that include speakers, workshops, chat room, group engagement sessions. Joyce is designing a workbook that goes along with each of the 5 weeks, and all of it is designed to help individuals find their own purpose and what brings them joy in life. So hopefully we will have that up this week. We lost a good week being without electricity and trees falling on a house and broadcasting live from the Cheesecake Factory. So we thank you all for being with us, and Cynthia, can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having me, and please reach out to me if you have questions.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.